Hello, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson, and a very warm welcome to episode 50, where we'll be talking about exploring cultural values. Now, I'm back after a break and I've been running my summer re-release season, which were the releases of the top podcast episodes from the last year. So if you listened in the last few weeks, then I hope you enjoyed that and you got lots of fresh insight and new learning over the summer period if you're here in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, today we're coming back to more of the usual format with a new topic. And I've already mentioned it's exploring cultural values. But this is such a huge topic. We're actually going to be talking about this over the next two episodes. And what it really comes down to is recognizing that there are situations where things just don't go smoothly when we are working in global teams, whether that's internally or externally with our customers and partners. Maybe you've experienced this yourself, where you've been on a call, in a meeting, or even received an email where you felt the way that people were communicating and behaving was really out of line with your expectations. Perhaps you even found their communication style and behavior unprofessional in your view. Or perhaps even it left you feeling frustrated and wound up after the interaction. This happens surprisingly frequently, as I find when I speak to my clients. And it's something that really can end up dividing us very much into them and us if we're not careful. Sometimes people react to this by just rolling their eyes or moaning to a coworker or a colleague. But in the worst circumstances, it can lead to deep divisions within teams, which is clearly not what we're aiming for. Particularly in the virtual working environment that many of us find ourselves today. To be successful in global business, we need to be able to collaborate well, build great relationships, and build trust. And that's where cultural intelligence comes in. Cultural intelligence is really just understanding why. Why do people do the things that they do? What are their drivers and motivations? And what are influenced by their cultural values? We don't see our own culture very well, and we don't understand necessarily how it influences us unless we take that step back, pause, and reflect what's going on. But too often in business, we're rushing into conversations and interactions, and we very quickly react to what's going on, rather than taking that pause with cultural intelligence to really think about what an alternative explanation might be. If we assume that in 99% of cases, people are motivated and want to work with us with good intent, then we must be missing something. We must be misunderstanding or misinterpreting what it is that person really wanted to communicate or do with us. Cultural intelligence is a topic that I've covered a number of times during the podcast, but I'm conscious that I haven't done this deep dive into the cultural values, which very simply are the way that we prefer to work, to live, and to interact with others in our world. Cultural values are a great starting point, understanding our own, but also understanding others' cultural values. And it's a core part of the work that I do with my individual and organisation clients. We always start with a cultural intelligence assessment, which includes understanding your cultural values. And so what I thought we'd do today is I'm going to explain what these key cultural values are. Now, there are 10 of them altogether. So for the purpose of part one, I'm going to explain the first 5. And then next episode, I'll explain the remaining 5 of the 10. As you listen to me speaking, I really would love you to really reflect which ones sound more like you. Of the 5, they are pairs, so there are 2 different explanations for each one, and I want you to really reflect on this as I'm speaking. So let's kick off. Now, the first cultural value that I wanted to talk about was individualism versus collectivism. If you're not familiar with these terms, don't worry. Simply put, it's really about how are we motivated to work. Do we prefer to work autonomously, independently, with individual goals? Or are we motivated by working collectively in a group and we prefer to make our decisions and have conversations in that group environment? Individualist cultures much prefer to be operating by themselves. They like to get on with things independently from the others in the group. Of course, they'll come together for meetings, but they won't necessarily be so reliant on this for example, moving projects forward. In collectivist cultures, it is much more about ensuring that everybody is involved, everybody has a say, and that before any major decisions can be made, then everybody in the group has to be part of this and ensure that their voice has been heard. Things to think about are that if you are somebody who you think comes from a collectivist culture, then maybe you don't like to speak up in front of other people. Perhaps you're more comfortable expressing yourself together as a group, but not so much being singled out or speaking up individually. Individualists, meanwhile, the individualist culture means that you're actually very comfortable speaking up, sharing your voice, even if your opinion is different from others. So that's the first cultural value. The next one is called power distance, and you can have low power distance cultures and high power distance cultures. So let's start with low power distance. These are typically more egalitarian, low hierarchy cultures where it really is about everybody has an equal share of voice, no matter how senior or junior people are within the organisation. I typically describe it as if I were to walk into a meeting room with everybody from the organisation there, I would not necessarily be able to identify straight away who is the leader in that room, who is the big boss. Often they are quite informal environments and often don't rely on the structures to make decisions, many different levels to sign off and approve, for example, a decision. In high power distance cultures, however, it is absolutely about that hierarchy. Everybody has a clear role, understands their role. There is a flow of communication that goes through each level, and usually people only speak to their own peers and people who are either one level up or one level below them within the organisation. They tend to be more formal environments and decisions are absolutely made by the leader. And there's a sense as well for people in high power distance cultures that the leader should act as the leader. They should act as the big boss. So that's power distance. Next, we have uncertainty avoidance. So low uncertainty avoidance versus high uncertainty avoidance. Essentially, this is about how do we feel about risk. In low uncertainty avoidance cultures, there's much more comfort with the idea of risk. There is a sense of experimentation and wanting to innovate and try new things. That risk is a good thing and in fact will help to move the organisation, the teams forward. However, in high uncertainty avoidance cultures, there is an acknowledgement that risk exists, of course, but this risk must be managed through contingencies, policies, procedures, project plans, all the P's. But basically, the idea of risk is that it needs to be carefully discussed and agreed how to handle it. As you can see, quite different attitudes, and you can see that if you have two people from the two ends of this particular cultural value, that they would approach business in quite different ways. Next, we have cooperative cultures and competitive cultures. Now, this is exactly as it sounds. Cooperative cultures are very focused on working collaboratively. They like to get to know each other first, to build the team. They are very supportive team environments and are focused on the idea of a spirit of harmony within the team. So what you have to be aware of in cooperative cultures is that conflict and disagreement is not so highly valued, particularly in public spaces or in open groups. So conflict or disagreement sometimes has to be handled behind the scenes, one-to-one, away from the group environment. In competitive cultures, teams of course still matter, but there is much more focus on getting the job done, working to win, to achieve, to reach the goals that have been set. And so there is that focus on really making sure that happens. And in fact, there isn't so much time spent getting to know each other, building the team in quite the same way as you'd find in cooperative cultures. You might even find in competitive cultures there's less focus on things like small talk and more of a separation between the personal and private life and professional life. People don't feel like perhaps they need to reveal so much about themselves. And then we have the final one, time orientation. Now, this is really about how do we think about the delivery horizon for our results. We have short term on one hand, and then we have long term on the other. And now clearly these are terms that need to be defined, but cultures which are much more focused on the short term might be expecting quicker results. So results that come through either this week, this month, but certainly this quarter. And that is the measure of success. In long-term oriented cultures, of course they want results quickly, but there's also that sense of willing to be investing now for the future. And there might be a culture of actually we also need to be strategically planning much further out. So cultures that are at two ends of this particular cultural value, you can see how that can lead to conflict around what is the best approach, what is the best types of projects to be working on to deliver the results. Now, as we come to the end of this episode, I'm really curious what you've been reflecting on as you've been listening to me speak. Have you recognized yourself in some of these cultural values? Perhaps you've already started to build up your picture, your profile of which one of these you are. And perhaps also you've started to build up the picture for people that you're working with and noticing where those differences and gaps lie that perhaps cause you some of the challenges that you've been experiencing in your work. If so, that's fantastic. And of course, I'll be sharing kind of next time more around this. In the next episode, we'll cover the next 5 cultural values. So don't miss that episode. But if this has really got you curious and you want to get your own profile through the cultural intelligence assessments that I do, then absolutely I'd be delighted to do this either for you individually or if you're from an organisation for your team so that you can receive both your individual and group results. This can be so insightful to understand what drives and motivates you and understand some of those differences that might be playing out in the team interactions. This is a great way to understand how to collaborate better, build better relationships, and ultimately the trust factor within your team. It's also a great basis for identifying those particular gaps that might need further support with training and coaching that I offer in this space. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to me via the links in the show notes to learn more about these. And if you have enjoyed today's episode and found it really fascinating, I do think this topic is particularly interesting, then please feel free to share this with a friend, a coworker, a colleague, somebody who would also find this really interesting. Perhaps it's somebody who's similar to you in cultural values profile, or perhaps even somebody who's different from you. But why not share this? And I'd love to get your feedback as well. So feel free to drop me a note as well to let me know what you recognised in this. And then finally, if you are feeling particularly generous, I would greatly appreciate it if you have enjoyed today's episode and topic. If you could rate the show, leave me a review, it really does make a big difference to make sure that the show is getting out there as widely as possible around the world, which is my absolute mission and goal for this. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to be back with a new topic today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Cultural Communication Confidence.